This episode is made possible by the generosities of our listeners. Thank you.
Welcome to the Creation Science
for Kids
show. God wants his people to take him seriously. So what does he remind them of? Creation. We have a look at Isaiah, then travel back to ancient Egypt with the new Young Explorers Exodus series. Then it's time to see how math connects with life through geometry and architectural vaults. Praise the Lord. I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart, in the company of the upright, in the congregation. Great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who delight in them. Full of splendor and majesty is his work, and his righteousness endures forever. He has caused his wondrous works to be remembered. The Lord is gracious and merciful. Psalm 111, verses 1 through 4. This is episode 58 of the podcast where we learn about Jesus, our Creator, and his amazing world. Hi, I'm Sherry Fields, your host, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Charity.
Hello.
And Samuel.
Hi.
To follow along with what we're looking at, check out the show notes. creationscience4kids.com/vaults. Okay, today I wanted to have a look way after creation, way after Moses, but still in the Old Testament, in the book of Isaiah. In chapter 48, God is once again telling off the Israelites for how they have been disobedient and turning to idols and things. And here are some of the things that he tells them. Samuel, would you read verse 3 for us?
I have declared the former things from the beginning, and they went forth out of my mouth, and I showed them. I did them suddenly, and they came to pass.
Okay, what does that remind you of? God is talking, and he said, I have declared the former things from the beginning. What's he talking about?
I don't know.
How do we know what the world was like before there were any people on the planet?
God told them.
God told us. So the only way anyone can know what it's like before human beings were on the planet is to either say, well, we will only consider the world and we'll figure out what could possibly have happened based on what we can see around us, or listen to the one who was there. And God says, I told you what I did beforehand. And what's cool about what he says about the things that were from the beginning? How did they get there?
They went forth out of his mouth.
Right. Which is exactly what God says he did. He said, let there be, over and over. And he told us. He didn't hide it. That's another thing that God tells us what we need to know. And I love this last bit. He says, I did them suddenly, and they came to pass. What's that tell you?
It happened quickly.
It happened quickly. Did it take billions of years for God to get around to creating?
No.
No. He said, I did them suddenly. People who want to accept what scientists say, who refuse to think about God, instead of what God tells us in the Bible, have to say, well, that's not really what this verse means, because God said, I did it suddenly. I told you. It went out of my mouth. This is how it is. So you have to reject what God is telling us to find billions of years. All right, then, Charity, if you would read down. In the meantime, he's told the people how obstinate they are, that their neck is made out of iron, and they refuse to humble themselves. He says, I'm doing it this way, so you won't say, well, it was just my idol that did it this way. And he is really upset at his people at this point. And then in verse 12 and 13, he says something very interesting to have them listen to him and acknowledge that he deserves for them to obey. Please read verse 12 and 13 for us.
Hearken unto me, O Jacob and Israel, my called. I am he. I am the first. I also am the last. Mine hand also hath laid the foundation of the earth, and my right hand hath spanned the heavens. When I call unto them, they stand up together.
Okay, so he says, listen up. I called you, Jacob and Israel. And he says, I am he. Have you heard how important that phrase is? What is that I am he connected with?
I am.
Uh-huh. And what is that? What's special about that I am?
It means I am the all-existent one.
Right. What do we call that? Do you remember when God was talking to Moses and Moses said, who should I tell my people has sent me? And what did God tell him?
I am.
Tell them, I am has sent you. So he's reminding people, I am the one who just is. So that's what he's starting with. That Jehovah, Yahweh, that whole nothing caused me to be. I just exist. And then he points out he is
The first. The
and
last.
right. What's that remind you of?
I am the Alpha and the Omega.
Who said that?
Jesus.
Where?
Revelation.
Revelation, the very end of the Bible, points this out. He is before all things and he surrounds all things. It doesn't mean we are going to cease to exist, but we depend on him. God does not depend on anything. That is directly connected to creation because God does not depend on anything. All things depend on him. That's what creation means. He made it. And then look at what he says he did. My hand laid the foundation of the earth. So you can almost imagine if you're making a building, whether it's a real building or even a Lego construction, you start with the foundation. And he says, I'm the one who did that with the whole earth. I put the very base of it together. And look at what he says next. My right hand hath spanned the heavens. Stretch your hand out. Spread your fingers out as wide as they will go. See how far it is from the tip of your thumb to the tip of your pinky? That is your hand's span. God says, my right hand from the tip of my thumb to the tip of my pinky is as wide as
the heavens.
And what's another name for the heavens? What do we call it usually nowadays?
The universe.
The universe. God is that big that the universe is something that he can palm with his hand, like the big basketball players can pick up a basketball with one hand. He can do that with the whole universe. Should we take somebody that big seriously?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, now this last bit, I had to look up what in the world is it talking about. When I call unto them, the heavens, they stand up together. Does that mean they were all folded up? Well, it kind of could. But the idea of standing up together in Hebrew is that they come to attention, like a soldier standing to attention and saluting, say, yes, sir, and all ready to do whatever God wants. So he says the whole universe is just waiting for my command to do whatever it is I ask of them. So the idea is you should too. Because I am so much bigger and more impressive than the idols you've turned away towards that there is no comparison, is there? No. So throughout the scriptures, whether it's in Acts, Revelation, or back here in Isaiah, you have God as creator being an important concept for us to remember why we should trust God, why we should take him seriously, why he deserves to be obeyed. Okay, you can probably tell a bit that we've been under the weather, but it actually worked out pretty well because I found out that there's a new resource designed for kids that'll help us understand just how accurate the Bible is and to be encouraged to continue to trust it, and that every time you examine the real world, you see that the Bible is true. A few years ago, a guy named Tim Mahoney had put out a documentary on what he'd found about the archaeological evidence for the Exodus and called Patterns of Evidence. And just recently, he released a series designed for kids called Patterns of Evidence Young Explorers. When I saw that come out, I was so excited and I thought, I really want to see this with my family and I want to tell you guys. So I contacted the people who made it and they gave me a download link for reviewers. So my family and I got to spend some of the time when we weren't feeling very well watching the 5 episodes they have put out, and now we're going to tell you about it. And I am very pleased to say that for the most part, we were very impressed, and it is something that is likely to be an encouragement to many people, and especially to kids who they're going to be facing questions like this a lot. So, Samuel and Charity, what do you want to tell other kids about the Young Explorers series that we watched? Was it boring?
No, it was fun.
It was a lot of fun. It didn't take itself too seriously.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But was it just a bunch of silliness?
No. The series is all about teaching young kids about biblical history and the things that really happened a long time ago before the Exodus and during the Exodus.
Mm-hmm. So it shows us what?
Shows us.
Did it just talk and say, you should believe the Bible because...
No, it showed the evidence as well.
Mm-hmm. And what did it start out with? What was a problem that Mr. Mahoney had when he was wondering about the evidence? What was everybody telling him?
That the evidence was too far into that.
Did they think it was evidence?
No, they didn't
No.
think the evidence.
So everybody was saying...
There's no evidence because we looked at the time frame that it should be, but there's nothing there.
Right. So it starts out with telling us why. They look at the Bible talking about the Israelites building the city of Ramesses, and they figure that means it had to be the Pharaoh Ramesses II. And that particular city was only in use for a couple hundred years. And so therefore the Exodus must have happened there. And when we look in the archaeological record for that time period, you can't find any sign of a bunch of Semite slaves. And so therefore, what did the people think?
There are no Semite slaves there.
And therefore...
The Exodus didn't happen.
The Exodus didn't happen. Yeah, I was actually listening for you grown-ups, Real Science Radio with Pastor Enyart. He's done 6 shows just recently, and I'll have a link to them. So even if you're listening to this in 2020, you can go back and listen to his shows on it. And what Pastor Enyart said is the people who don't want to believe in the Bible say the Exodus didn't happen, and when it didn't happen was in the 13th century BC.
That makes no sense.
It doesn't.
Nothing happened. Nothing happened here.
Yeah, it is crazy thinking, but when you refuse to accept God and his scriptures, you end up thinking crazy. So Tim Mahoney found some guys that do take the Bible seriously and say, wait a minute, there's lots of evidence for non-Egyptians, people who were from the area where the Israelites were the same sort of people as they were. You just find it earlier in the record than what these people are saying. And it walks us through. How many episodes are in the series?
5.
5. And were they itty-bitty episodes?
No, they were long episodes.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, in fact, when it was like, okay, it's time to listen so that the ideas will be fresh, and I saw how much there was to listen to, it was like, oh dear, we're going to be a bit late putting out the podcast, but that kind of worked out since we had to let our throats rest. So there's lots of information, and it wasn't all just throwing facts at us. Because it was for kids, what did they do? How was the story set up?
It was a bunch of kids going around with Mr. Mahoney to different places.
Yeah. Yeah, they had it set up where a group of friends, you don't know why they know each other, but they live in the same town, start out, they're all on a camping trip, and they start asking questions around the campfire. And he's like, okay, you want to know more? Well, here, I'll send you on this quest. And so they keep having these clues show up wherever they are. Oh, one of the things, they would get these little pamphlets saying, here's the Bible study to do, verses to read, and here's where to meet up next. And what do we know? Like, one girl found it in her flour when she was baking. Was there any way that she had missed it in her?
It was a magical story.
Yeah. And so you had the tiny magic of the papers just showing up out of the blue. And one of the guys in one of the episodes, you can tell he was hearing what we were hearing because we didn't get to see the words. And he was looking around as if he was trying to find the disembodied voice that was reading it to him. So that was obviously magic. What else was highly magical that you guys liked? Where did they go to learn a lot of the information?
Into the exploration chamber.
In the exploration chamber. Yeah. And where was the exploration chamber?
Wherever they were.
Right. The first time it was...
Like they had to go through this crevice?
Yeah. It was inside a rock crevice. And another time when we were wondering, how did they all fit in there? It was...
a tent.
Yeah, it was in a little pup tent that holds like 2 people, and they stuffed, what were there, 10 of them?
Yeah.
Yeah, all standing up and looking around. So actually, if you guys have ever seen Star Trek, where they have the room they go into that's just a grid and then it has a virtual reality, that's what it was like. So it was a lot of fun, and it was very obvious where it was being clear that this actually happened. And here's where we're just having fun with the magic. I didn't find that it was blurred too much. So I don't think that was confusing, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Yeah. What was one of the other fun things about the movie? Who did we start watching for?
They had this guy his name was Alexander.
Yeah. When he was a butler, his name was Alexander. Uh-huh.
And the rest of the time, he was like an ice cream guy and a park ranger.
Right. And every time you met him, his character was
Silly.
Made you laugh. Because the first time he was warning the kids, you gotta hide all your food and keep it safe, because otherwise
Squirrels were
Chipmunks.
chipmunks will get it. So it was funny. And I hadn't realized the park ranger, because that was right at the beginning, was going to be a continuing actor playing different parts. But after the ice cream man, is like, wait a minute, I think I've seen him before, and he looks really silly. So we started recognizing, hey, there's Alexander again. So that was really fun. And the Egyptologist that they went to the mansion and would talk to him, what did you think about him?
He liked them.
Yeah, you could tell he enjoyed being with the kids, was very warm, and knew how to say things so that it was clear for the children. Now, I didn't notice my younger kids had any problems with it, but what did you think about the children actors, Charity?
They sounded very scripted.
Yeah.
Like they were just reading something.
Yeah. Well, they'd obviously memorize it, or were maybe had, what do you call it? A teleprompter. But yeah, they were not the best of actors, but
they're kids.
Yeah, they were kids. They had fun environments. One of them had a really cool tree house, and one of them, a young man, was a guitar player who would play like at a local coffee shop. I thought the series overall was really well done. Like the last one was actually after the Exodus, talking about when they conquered Canaan, and especially when they destroyed Jericho. And we had listened to some of the archaeological evidence, some of it put together by one of the guys I interviewed with biblical archaeology. And what were we hoping they would mention?
How Rahab's house didn't fall down.
Yeah, we could tell from the ruins that Rahab's house was
on the north side.
On the north side of Jericho. We know that because that's the only stretch of that ancient wall that didn't get knocked down. And they did mention it. And what else did they mention that archaeologists said is unique in the finds of burned and looted cities?
There was still the grain.
Yeah, there was grain that had just been burnt in place. Why wouldn't other cities have the grain when it had been burnt? If you conquered a city, what would you do with their grain?
You would keep it.
You'd keep it because...
And
eat it yourself. Or if you had plenty of food for you and your family, you could...
Sell it.
So, yeah, there was lots of information. There's good evidence that they probably have found Joseph's palace and even his... tomb. And what is kind of sad, it shows how you can tell the people went from being prosperous and doing well to having what happened to them.
A famine!
Slavery, and even that their children were dying, and that later you can tell that there were a lot more women that survived out of what should have been the case. And so there's tons and tons of evidence, and all of it put together in bite-sized pieces, broken up with fun stuff. So it makes for a really fascinating series that kids, at least up to, 11 or 12, are going to really enjoy. After that, you can just watch the grown-up documentary. I bet you will enjoy that a lot more, Charity.
Yay.
Speaking of which, this is your last report for the Creation Science for Kids show.
Yeah.
Because you're getting too old.
Yes.
And in fact, pretty shortly, Charity is going to be starting her own podcast.
The Princess Podcast.
So we're going to be working on that, getting the first episode up in the next couple of weeks. And so you can go look for that. It'll be all fairy tales and George MacDonald audiobook stuff. So, but she gets to do the last report. But first, I have a joke for you guys. Who was the most horrific sinner in the Bible?
I don't want to know.
I don't know.
Considering we were doing about the Exodus, I thought this would be a good one because it's Moses. He managed to break all 10 commandments at the same time.
That was because the rest of the children of Israel were breaking a commandment.
And did he really break them? What did he do?
He smashed them.
He smashed them. Okay. What's your report about, JD?
Vaults. Vaults are elongated arches that are used to cover a room. You know how you have a normal house with a flat roof? A vault is where the roof is curved to make like a dome that doesn't have the ends. As soon as people started building with stone, they knew how to use vaults.
Uh-huh.
The oldest ones that you know of today were built by the Sumerians, who lived near Babylon, and also the Egyptians. They were very fond of barrel vaults. The passageways of the pyramids are barrel vaults. That's just your basic curved arch that's been stretched and is the same height.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until the Romans that we get different types of vaults.
Mm-hmm. Now, so the geometry of an arch, what is it that makes the vault stand? What do you need?
The walls and the keystone, which...
Mm-hmm. So how do you build an arch? Or a vault?
Well, first, you actually make a slightly smaller base made out of wood that you build this vault over.
Okay.
So you make the vault out of wood first,
Mm-hmm.
and then you put the stone on top of it,
Mm-hmm.
and you drop a keystone in place to keep it down.
So, well, that's when you get up to what you're going to have for the roof. First, you build your
walls.
wall straight up, and then you have your stone. And do you remember they use the word corbelled? Do you remember what corbelling is?
Corbelling is where you have a smaller stone. And then you have a bigger stone, and then you have a bigger...
And the bigger stone does what?
The bigger stone overlaps it.
So on the outside, the wall goes straight, but the bigger stone...
It's out further.
It sticks out, to start to form that roof. Mm-hmm. And then you
keep adding layers of bigger stones.
Mm-hmm.
So you bigger and bigger until you get to the top.
Now, when we were using our wooden blocks to build it, does it always work having just a keystone on top?
Oh, no.
Because if you just have the stones overlapping and you put one big heavy rock at the top, what happens?
It all falls down.
So that's where the corbelling comes in, where the stone is actually supported and you can hold it down on the outside. Where, like, if you've got it inside of a giant solid pyramid, you've got a whole bunch of weight holding the edge of the stone in place as it's hanging out over emptiness on the other side. So as long as the stone doesn't crack, it's not going to fall in. There's another thing, it's not actually a vault. What else did the ancients do with your arch idea?
They made domes.
And what do you do with a dome? So you take your arch and what do you do?
Spin it.
You spin it in a circle. And how ancient are those?
Back to Cyprus?
Yeah, back to the Stone Age. So, the book you were studying about vaults has a really cool picture. Can you describe it?
It looks like a beehive.
And this is showing a picture of it from the inside. So you've got the wall going straight up, a circular wall, and then
you have all these corbelled stones.
The stones sticking out where we're seeing the bit that's sticking out, coming in closer and closer to the middle. And what do they have for the keystone?
A pillar from the top to the bottom.
Keeping the whole thing from collapsing. And again, this goes back as far back as we have any archaeological. So this was built, this one is in
Italy
by the Etruscans. Cyprus has them. Who else had it?
The Egyptians. They also had this dome inside of northern Iraq.
Which is part of
Mesopotamia,
where people first settled at the time of Babel and just beyond. Yeah, so whether it's a long arch or a spun arch, people were very good at using stones to make these dome structures. Didn't we find the domes like all the way up to the British Isles?
Yeah.
Yeah, so people all over the place knew how to use this. And think of if the traditional African structures with their mud brick and stuff.
Yeah. They had the domes.
Yeah,
as well.
and they still use it. Yeah. Okay, so later on, the Romans, they started developing other ways of doing vaults. What do we call that?
Well, we have the groin vaults.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically like the barrel vaults, and you have two of them, and they are pointed.
They meet and make a what shape?
X.
Yeah. Or if you're following the barrel, you've got one going up and down and another going straight across, so like a cross. And where it meets, you have like a ribbing that forms the X. Yeah. And it allows you to have a nice wide open space. Yeah, they use this. The great cathedrals have lots of vaults. Now, what was the problem? Barrel vaults needed you to have what to keep it from collapsing?
Really sturdy walls.
Yeah. So that was something you either had to have a thick wall or a whole pyramid to support it. Like when we built ours, we put in extra wooden braces on the outside to hold it in place.
Yes.
So what else? I showed you the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. What did it use to support its vaults?
These big old, looks like a crane or something.
A steel girder on the outside. Do you remember what it's called?
Buttress.
What kind?
Flying.
A flying buttress, yeah. So if you go, the actual cathedral is fairly narrow on the inside. It's still a huge space, but the outside is far bigger, but it looks very much like, how would you describe it to somebody who hasn't seen? Almost like spider legs, but whole bunches of them on the outside coming out. And that's because if you didn't have those, what would happen to the
it would just fall over.
Yeah, the pressure from the roof would all meet at the one point, and it would just buckle outwards. And those flying buttresses are stopping it from pulling out, because the way the roof is, instead of just going down, it pulls outwards. Okay, and then in your book that you were studying, it has a beautiful picture of a English style of vaults. And what is that?
Those are fan vaults.
Yeah, and how would you describe that?
Like, you take an ice cream cone and you chop it in half and you glue it to a wall.
Mm-hmm. So you've got the pillar coming up, and then the top of it is shaped like a
half a cone.
Half a cone, because an ice cream cone is a geometric shape, a cone. And so you take half of it, and then they've got the stonework is all carved beautifully. So it makes a fairly narrow, almost pointed arch that's just really pretty.
Yeah.
Okay, so in order to build these large spaces that were comfortable and beautiful to look at, they had to use lots of
math.
Yeah, math is very useful, and you've got to understand physics, how the pressure points work. And how long have we been smart enough to understand these things?
Well, since Noah.
As far back as we can find.
Probably before that.
Can we scientifically study that?
Nope.
No. All we have left from before Noah is what we have recorded for us in the Bible, which isn't very much.
Yeah.
But when we look at the archaeology, we know that people are
smart
as far back as the record shows. We've got 2 new things going on for our ministry. It's no fun typing in a long web address using a smartphone, so I bought the domain cs4ks.com to make things easy for you. Just type in those 5 symbols plus the .com, and you'll get right to the main podcast page. And while you're there...
Has this show been a blessing to your family? Running this podcast and ministry isn't free. Plus, it takes a lot of time.
We now have a Patreon account where you can help us out. If just a few of our listeners help, even if it's just $1 a month, it will cover the basic expenses. And anything above that will help us improve things for the future. Visit cs4ks.com to find out how you can get involved.
Don't forget, you can find links to all the things we talked about today by visiting the show notes page. Creation Science, the number 4 kids.
Oh, you know what? Go ahead and do the CS4KS.
Oh, sorry. cs4ks.com/vaults or /058 for episode 58.
While you're there, I'd like to ask for your help. If you know someone who might enjoy listening to this podcast and checking out my website, would you let them know for us? Every article I do, including today's show notes, has share buttons to make it super easy for you to pass on to your friends on Facebook or by email. You have amazing power to help your friends find out the truth with just a click of a button.
Plus, if you want to encourage us, leaving the show a rating on the Apple Podcast directory is a great way to do that and help families looking for new podcasts to find us. Thanks!
Do you like science? Got a subject you want to learn about? Or maybe you like telling stories? Remember, it's super easy to turn your smartphone into a recorder. And if you send me a report, story, joke, or interesting idea, I might use it in a future show. Head over to cs4ks.com to find out what to do.
Well, this finishes up our show for today. Until next time, have fun treasuring your amazing universe and creator. Charity out.
Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. For thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. Revelation 4:11.